Welcome to the Way of Light, where we exist to engage Christians in their faith and mobilize them to be light. As you listen to these talks, prayers, and interviews, we hope you would be challenged and inspired to know Jesus more deeply and invite others to do the same.
Do you have someone in your life, family, friend, an employee that you work with, someone you work for, or someone that works for you, that does not believe the same things as you? If you do, these interviews are a must listen for you. If you haven't listened to part 1, Overcoming Differences, an interview with my younger sister, Breezy, this is really a series of two interviews that is intended to draw you closer to Christ in the way that you interact with those you don't agree with. So go back, listen to that first episode as it really sets the tone for this second part. And this part is really significant and important. I want you to tune in to actually hear a deep discussion between my sister and I around faith and our upbringing. We all come to a fork in the road at some point in our lives where we determine whether or not we believe in and pursue the faith of our family or community or the people that we surround ourselves with growing up. And there's generally 3 outcomes that might take place. While we're in that upbringing, there's 3 outcomes that might take place. 1, we may blindly follow in the footsteps of our parents or others without ever stopping to consider why we believe what we believe. So the first thing is you might blindly follow in the footsteps of others. Another possible outcome, number 2, is after seeking answers for yourself and determining what truth is based off of your own interest and you're seeking what you believe to be true, we walk in an entirely different direction than we were raised or influenced, but at least a personal choice and a decision was made. So the first is you might follow blindly. The second is you might seek out answers determined for yourself, make it personal. And the third is we begin our own search for truth and decide to follow similarly behind those we see as examples, but no longer blindly. Our faith becomes personal to you. And so no matter what you are in this phase, maybe you're in a place, chances are if you're listening to this podcast, you might have some element of faith, whether you're following Jesus now or you're interested in what it looks like to follow Jesus, or you just saw a podcast with an interesting conversation in the title. And you want to check it out. There is an opportunity for you to choose for yourself what you believe and why you believe it and make it personal for you. My sister, Breezy, I love her to death. We grew up in the same environment, the same environment of faith where our dad is a youth pastor and we grew up in the church. But she came to a conclusion on her own for what she had determined what was true. And I pursued a different path and came to a conclusion what I believe was true, and not just blindly following my parents, but making a determination for myself. And so today's interview, you will have an opportunity to hear a more intentional discussion between my sister and I as we talk about the deeper differences of our faith and what we believe. So let's go to that interview right now. All right, sister, this is part 2 of our conversation with just so many details. Like when you grow up with somebody, there's like we could make the 12 episode series on the stories of our life and the things that we've experienced. And really the hope out of that first episode is just that through our conversation, anybody that is listening, that maybe you have family or siblings or people that you have, maybe you realize you could have more intentional conversation with, like I've realized I need to have with you, Breezy, then I think there are others who can be encouraged and inspired by that as well. So in this part of our conversation, we're going to make a hard shift. So Breezy, are you ready to jump into some deep stuff here?
I'm so ready.
Okay.
I've got my scuba gear on.
Before we dive into this section of our conversation, tell me more about your life now. You just broke the news that you are engaged. That's a big deal.
Yeah.
Engaged to a nice, wonderful man with long, gorgeous hair named Stefan. And go ahead, tell
Yeah.
us about your fiance. How did you guys meet? This is a fun story.
It's truly it's so funny talking about it. It's like a storybook moment, and he's like Fabio to me. So it's like
That's cool.
it's I love it. I had just gotten out of a relationship with this one dude, and I was like, you know what? I think that I've been putting too much importance on personality and not enough importance in the way that people look, to be perfectly honest with you. So I was like, I'm just going to go try and like go on a date with the hottest person I can find. And that's what I'm going to do, because I was like, I just got out of this relationship. Let's see where life takes me. I was working in a coffee shop at the time, and I remember I was like by the front door getting the trash, and he walked past me, and he was like just, I think, about to start working in the forge. So he had his like a wife beater tank top on, and he was like all covered in tattoos. And to be honest, looked a little bit like Jesus at the time with his beard and his long hair, like white Jesus.
White Jesus, everybody. There you go. Shout out to the Catholics.
Yep. And I just like ran behind the bar, and then wrote my phone number on his cup. And then put the sleeve over the phone number with just like a tiny little bit of the phone number peeking out. And I was like, okay, if he texts me and he's like, he has a girlfriend, that's not a big deal, because he has a girlfriend. Like, I don't know that. Like, and then if he texts me and he's like, I'm not interested, also not a big deal. I'll find someone else who's interested.
Wow.
You know? So I was like waiting all day, so nervous, but eventually got a text that said, hey, I found this number on my cup.
Who dis?
Like, my name is Stefan. What's up? And I was like, hey, I'm the redhead who made your coffee today at Milo. And he literally did not remember me at all, which I thought I was flexing so hard. Wow. I was like, I'm just the redhead who made your coffee. And he was like, okay, well, I'm sorry, I don't remember. But, and I basically then was like, okay, well, that's fine. Do you want to just go out for a drink? And he was like, yeah, let's do it. And so we went out for a drink, and he was just like the most interesting person I had ever, like, probably ever interacted with. Wow. He's a blacksmith. At the time he was doing white interior Jesus design stuff. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. That was a horrible dad joke. Yeah.
That's funny. Sorry. I thought maybe you were making a parallel to being a carpenter.
No. No, but that makes sense. You know, okay. All right.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'm sorry.
He's metal Jesus.
Oh, okay.
Because he's heavy metal. So instead of carpenter, he's a blacksmith.
Yeah. Okay.
And so he also like was doing like interior design stuff at the time, and he like plays music and is into like all these different kinds of like art. The thing that really just made me so desperate to hang out with him again, though, was that we talked about monsters and like cryptids for quite a while during our first date. And I just thought that was so great, because my previous dates I went on, like, it was, I don't
you
even
didn't talk about monsters.
It.
I'm so sorry.
Not even a little bit. And I would broach the subject. No, it didn't go anywhere.
That's got to be a really good tell, though, to know, like, okay, is this my person? I'm into monsters. Are you into monsters? Can we monster together?
It's so exactly. It so is. And I'll tell you something else weird that I was doing at the time was every guy that I was going on a date with, I would make him take a Which Emperor's New Groove character am I quiz on BuzzFeed. And I decided I would not date a man if he got a result that was not Kronk.
Wow. No
and there was literally a guy before him that I was like talking to on Tinder, and I made him like take the quiz. I was like, hey, take this fun quiz real quick. Have you ever wondered? And he was like, sure. And he got Cusco. So I was like, obviously we will not be going on a date.
You got Cusco? I'm like, heck no.
Yeah, absolutely not. But I made Stefan take it like 2 or 3 days after like our first date, and he got Kronk, and I was like, this is the final piece of confirmation that I
Look, so
needed.
it turns out all those Facebook personality tests really are useful for some things in life. So way to
Oh
find
yeah,
the value
super.
in that. What
Yeah.
I love most about that story is I'm thinking about you seeing this dude walk in a wife beater, long hair, tatted up, and you running behind the coffee bar. And I'm just imagining you like ducking behind the counter, grabbing the cup, like, hey, someone else is making this coffee. Hey, give that to me. Give that to me. I've got to sneak some love in it. And then you
Oh, I
take the
literally pushed another girl off the bar. I was like, I need to make this coffee.
It's so funny because I remember you telling that story a couple years ago, and
Yeah.
just like the nervousness you felt. But hey, good on you. That's bold. That's real bold.
Yeah.
I love that.
Just do
And
it.
just do it.
Yeah.
Just do it.
Just be brave about that. Be respectful of people's boundaries and space, but if you think someone's cute, just ask them out. And
Mm,
if they have a girlfriend, who cares? They have a girlfriend. Be like, all right, no worries, goodbye.
yep.
And
Peace.
then if they're like, oh, not you, just be like, all right, attitude,
Yep.
and then move on
Don't
because
need
that's
that.
gross.
And give them a
Yeah.
Facebook personality test. Figure out what character they are on Emperor's New Groove, and you can
Yeah.
decide by that test whether they'll be grooving with you. And
Yeah.
that's all.
It doesn't have to be Kronk. It's just whoever you like from Emperor's
Yeah,
New
but it
Groove.
also doesn't need to be couscous. Or is that his name?
Yeah, probably not him. Cusco.
Cusco, not couscous.
Mm-hmm.
All right,
That was
that's what
close.
I called him as a little kid. Anyway, okay, all right, it's
Mm-hmm.
time to make the shift. That's good. Thank you
Okay.
for giving the intro. So we talked again, like we've talked a lot about our own like stories, like siblings growing up, sibling rivalries, the competition between us, and so in this part of our conversation, I know that we'll also acknowledge some of the more difficult conversations that we've had regarding faith and what we believe. And for those that listen to the first part of our conversation, they'll remember that like this, like there's a like some really really positive benefits of being in this conversation is that like one, we're able to reminisce on memories together and just talk about things that we can
Mm-hmm.
relate on. And I also want to be able to have this conversation knowing that we can have this type of conversation and level of depth and things that we may have differed on at points in our life, and just be chill about it. Like I have finally come to the place, and I'm so thankful because I carried a weight for so long that I had to convince you of something, and
Mm-hmm.
just like I don't know, it's part of the pride. Like I've got to convince you that I'm right, you're wrong, which is just like dumb. Because I'm wrong about a lot of things in life. And but in this place, like I feel like I'm in a confident place of, wow, I don't feel the burden of trying to convince you of anything anymore. Because you
Mm-hmm.
are who you are, and you're an individual human being who gets to make your own choices. And
It's true.
it's great freedom to have. It's a great freedom to have. And sometimes I wish I didn't personally have it because I make a lot of wrong choices. But anyway. So let's talk about this for a second. Let's go back and just to kind of bring clarity to the fact that we both grew up in the same house. That's a no-brainer. Like we both grew up in the same house, under a lot of the same rules and morals and standards in our home. And then thinking about like just being raised in a Christian house where we went to church basically every week, and the things that Dad believed and Dad grew up believing. Talk
Mm-hmm.
talk to me a little bit about what were your early experiences of faith and your experiences at church, and then lead into and then I'll dig a little bit deeper from there. But what do you remember early on, and then we'll kind of come to where you've been the last few years.
I remember, I mean, I liked going to church when I was younger. It was fun. It was like something to do. There was always food, like free food.
Mm-hmm.
There was like sometimes cute boys.
Not really though. You didn't have a good pool.
Yeah, not really. No, there wasn't really. But every time I went, I hoped. I really
Yep.
hoped. I was like, maybe this time will be different. And that's, yeah. But I really enjoyed it. I liked the community when I was little. I liked that it was a moment where people were forced to spend time with me sometimes. But I think as I got older and I got more towards the point of actually understanding what everybody was thinking, it started to begin the exit for me. It started really with, like, I mean, obviously you start to realize, okay, we don't all just come hang out together and like this, like Jesus and this God that everyone's talking about. Okay, everybody obviously has very strong opinions on them. What are the right opinions to have? And, you know, obviously, I think for a really long time, I just assumed that mom and dad knew everything in the whole world. And so obviously, whatever they think is right, and that's all I have to do. And then past that, everything is okay.
It's so funny because I
but
was
as
the
I got,
opposite. I thought they were full of bull, and I didn't believe anything that they said for years.
that's so funny that you thought
Yeah.
that. That's so funny. Yeah, no, and I remember like sometimes I was just like, Zach is so silly. If he would just calm down and do what they wanted, everything would be
I
fine.
know. I learned that way too late.
Yeah. But I think that as I got older, I'm a very pattern oriented person, and I think that I'm the kind of person where if you say something, okay, first of all, it's dad's fault.
Mhm.
He drilled into my brain. It's not his fault, you know, but he drilled into me from a young age that you, no matter what, absolutely no matter what, your priority at all times is giving kindness and giving gentleness and giving understanding. And that is gold standard. That's it. You like, and watching him be that way, like that's all I wanted to do. Was I wanted to make people happy the way that he made them. I wanted them to feel comfortable around me the way they were comfortable around him. Like they could talk to me the same way they talked to him. That was like my end goal in life, was to be like someone else's James, which as I've gotten older, no one can be that.
Yeah.
Like we were talking about earlier, I'm not built that way. As an adult, I've had to find my boundaries or I'll burn up and explode. But so being taught that kindness and understanding and all that kind of stuff is the most beautiful, important thing, and by a man who just was so like enamored with Jesus as a person. Jesus is great. I think Jesus is amazing. His teaching, his like all of that stuff, chef's kiss.
Sure.
That's great.
Ooh, chef's kiss. Okay.
But when I got older and I started to see inconsistencies in the church, and I would ask questions about things like, if like God created everything, then why do people treat animals this way? Or why do people treat each other this way? Or why do people treat the earth this way? And it was a lot of passive excuses, you know, that, you know, at the end of the day, human error is a thing. Nobody is like such a divine being that they're not going to screw up.
Sure.
But it was seeing a lot of people who I thought had all the right answers just be completely inconsistent and be selfish and not be loving, and doing the opposite and using the Bible to justify the hateful things that they were doing. And eventually I got to the point where I was like, do I want to keep justifying the actions and behaviors of this group and keep spending my time learning about it, or despite its conflicts with my beliefs about caring about other people and other things, do I keep going? And eventually it just wasn't, it didn't feel right anymore. And that's not me saying like every anybody can be a bad person.
Mm-hmm.
Anybody can be a good person. But I think it just eventually became more about justifying that. What I noticed more than anything else was the justification of hateful behavior,
Mm-hmm.
and using the Bible as like their personal shield against morale when it came to things that were just straight screwed up, like honestly, people's opinions on immigration and like how immigrants are treated or how they're spoken about in the media. Like, if you're a kind, loving person, like, you would not think twice about taking someone in and giving them everything so that they can have everything that you've had. And I know it's more complicated than that. And obviously,
Sure.
like, to change something is not just like one simple step. It's a breakdown of a million different things.
Right.
But at the end of the day, if your end goal is not what is the kindest thing, then I just like, I don't want to do it. Not to say that I'm not an unkind person sometimes. I can absolutely be, I can be unkind 100%. But I think that the inconsistencies there are what really took me away from everything.
Yeah. And honestly, I don't blame you. And you are not the only person, obviously, and you've had probably conversations with many other people. And I've had conversations with many people who maybe they grew up in a Christian home or they grew up going to church. But then the only thing, unfortunately, in so many Christian circles, the only thing that is the most consistent or the primarily consistent thing in Christian circles is their lack of consistency. When it comes to what, like, they say they believe, what I say I believe, and the way that I live. And that could cause like this, like, there's a reason for this wrestling that you and so many others have experienced. It's like, yeah, I can't blame you. There's a whole lot of sucky Christians in the world that just do not represent the light of Jesus well. Like, the number of people I've talked to, even in the last 3 months, who maybe they have family members or someone close to them who was a pastor of a local church and great at home. Like, honestly, okay, so I was talking to grandma, our grandma, last time I was in Canada, Dad's mom. And as I talked with her, she was sharing about how her grandpa, it was either her grandpa or her grandpa's dad, was a pastor at a church and this public figure, but at home was incredibly abusive, manipulative, and just was like emotionally abusive to his wife and to his kids. And that's what people grew up with. Like, that had run, like, that is part of our family history. And so, like, yes, like, it makes sense for you and so many others to just like start to question and walk away for some of those things of, like, you say you believe this thing, or you use scripture to like manipulate people and do other things. And it's hypocritical, it's judgmental, it's legalism. It's like I would see the people, the Pharisees in the Bible, who were that, and honestly had been me for so much of my life. And so thinking about that piece, talk to your older brother like you're venting to a friend about your older brother. and the experiences that we had early on when you started to question faith. I remember one of the first interactions I had with you when you started to question faith is when you brought up a church in Green Plow Coffee. Do you remember that conversation? You brought up Bethel Church, and you're like, it's kind of culty.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I do remember that. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think the reason that I felt that way was just because a lot of the ways that church works is the very same way that cults work, especially in youth ministry, as like in regards to like trips, youth trips, when you go to camps and stuff.
Okay.
the stuff that they do to the kids is very similar to stuff that they do to adults in cults to get them to experience like feelings of being overcome by the spirit, when even though it's midnight and you haven't really been sleeping all week and you've only been eating junk food and
hyped up on Monster
everyone
Energy.
around you is everyone's crying at the same moment, you're gonna feel something, you know. And in regards to like when I was younger, Dad and Mom would always say like, you can be friends with anyone, you know. And I think that was true, but it was, you can be friends with anyone, but certain people are dangerous, so you have to be careful about what they say to you because it could mislead you or be a lie. And so I think for a long time, like I had friends who weren't Christians, but there was always like a small part of me was like, I know something you don't know. And you just don't know it because you're not as smart as me. And then I, you know, grew up and I was like, that's so silly that I thought that, and embarrassing. And, but it was just because I had always, I don't know, I was always taught about like Christians and then the other. And for such a long time, I thought that Christians were the majority, which isn't the case at all. Sure. And there are other people having completely different experiences who have never once spoken Christianese in their life.
Yeah.
And I think that it was so weird that I spent so much time never knowing about this entire world that was happening. You know, now I'm an adult and I don't get most pop culture references.
Yeah.
And I don't understand like what certain people mean when they're talking about like specific like events with like people in politics over like a certain amount of time when I was alive, but like I just wasn't exposed to like what was going on there. This is all very like long-winded.
That's okay.
What I'm pretty much just trying to say is like I felt like I was completely shielded from my other option. I think that we were always told we have an option. We don't have to be a Christian. We don't have to do any of this stuff. But all I knew was, you know, God is good. Jesus is good. All of that is good. I can go to the other side at risk of my own, like at risk of my soul.
Yeah.
You know, I can look deeper at risk of my soul, you know? And so why would I want to ever look into that? And I feel like that's really unfair. To like, you know, to kids who are trying to figure out who they are, you're not going to know who you are until you are able to experience all your options.
Sure.
And actually make a decision. And some people like go their whole lives never going to church and end up going to church, and that makes them happy.
Yeah.
And that's like great. I'm not just talking about one experience. I just think like being so submerged in that for such a long time. And I thought I knew other stuff because like we took religion classes on other religions,
right? But
it was always through the lens of, and this religion says that, but that's kind of silly because we both know Jesus would never let that happen, you know? And so it was never serious. It was kind of always this thing of I have an option, but I never actually knew what my options were.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think you're absolutely right. I think like there was that element of an upbringing, and I do think there's some reasoning to that. But to your point, growing up in a Christian home where our dad was the pastor, and mom believing what she believed and following suit with dad in a lot of things, and but growing up in that. Yeah, I think we were sheltered from a lot of things, and I can totally I can see how your perspective and your lens. It's like, oh well, I wasn't like we were told you have a choice, and God doesn't force you to choose Him. You have a choice, and yet it seems like we only ever are given one option. And granted, like from my perspective, I'm gonna tell my I'm gonna tell my daughter the same thing. Like I want you to have a choice, and because God's not going to force you to choose him. And while at the same time, I am going to give her a choice to make her own decisions in life, but I'm not going to expose her to pornography or like just things at a young age that I know scientifically would be damaging to her. So there's certain things where we would know, like, okay, I'm not going to bring her to a brothel just to see if she wants to experience this lifestyle. But when it comes to your point, like, I also, where I see mom and dad, like we weren't exposed to different political worldviews, where that would be like an example of something safe. That's like, hey, I want you to hear this different perspective. And like I didn't hear growing up, as passionate as dad was about the church, we also didn't listen to videos or podcasts about, like, from people who thought different things than we did. And so you're absolutely right. Like, I think like that could have been beneficial for me to see the world through a different lens, and help open up my eyes more to other things. And I fight the tension now as a dad. I'm like, oh, like, you're right in the sense, like, in one sense of like there was this seclusion and this bubble of spirituality and sheltering. Granted, we were homeschooled for a couple of years, so if you're homeschooled, you're automatically in a bubble. But then I also feel that tension as a dad of like, there are so many things in this world to choose from. And I don't want my daughter to feel super overwhelmed, but I don't want her to feel some of the things that you felt, of like you were forced to only be in one space. But I want to bring an invitation. Like, is that fair to say? Like, I want to give an invitation, but also, like, I don't want to force her to go to all of these things and whatever. I don't know if I'm making sense at this point. But.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. I think, obviously, I'm not saying bring your kid to a brothel. It's kind of like,
no, I knew you're
if
not. That was a very dramatic example on my part.
Yeah. If you have a good sense of judgment, you're going to know there's no rule of what is healthy to expose your kids to. But if you're a well-adjusted adult, it's kind of like pornography. There's no rule for it, but when you see it, you know it.
Right.
That's what it is. It's kind of the same thing of like, maybe maybe your kid is 11 and they want to see this movie that has a political drive that is not something that coincides with your personal beliefs. Do you let her go see the movie? Or do you let her go see the movie after you've told her that those political beliefs are not accurate? Or do you let her go see the movie without any context? Or do you let her go see the movie and say, there are some different things in this movie. If you're confused about any of it, we can totally do some research together and we can figure out, how you feel about it.
That's great. Yeah.
And that, I feel like, leaves the option open, because if you're prefacing something by going, if it's obviously like something that you're like, hey,
like, it's not just faith or political, it's like moral and like goodness, and kindness. And
like I said,
they kill people. Killing people's not right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. There are certain things where it's just like, no kid needs to see that. That's ridiculous. Like,
Sure.
it when you see it. But like, instead of sending them to the movie with being like, hey, so I just want to let you know that this movie actually supports this idea that I don't really think is that great. It's not something that we believe. Just keep that in mind when you go see the movie.
Yeah.
Is not even leaving the option open, because as a kid, you're like, if my parent doesn't believe this, it's wrong. Because if you don't believe it, it's bad. Because you are only trying to do the best things, which you are. You're trying to steer them in a good direction.
Sure.
And I'm not saying like giving them free reign, but even just being like, okay, like, you go see the movie, and then when you get back, like, tell me what you think about it.
Yeah. Having an
it?
open conversation about it. I think that is a great, like, something I'll do with Alora often, and then we're going to kind of transition topics a little bit. Is we'll watch a movie together, and it's primarily like moral goodness, kindness. Like, you shouldn't talk to people like that, but it's not like instructing her. It's the question of, hey, sweetheart, what did you think about that interaction? How did that girl treat her mom and dad? and then she can kind of process it on her own. So I don't want to teach her what to think as much as I want to teach her how to think. And if I can teach her
Yeah.
how to think, then she begins to make decisions on her own and not just
Mm-hmm.
copycat how I think, right? So I don't want to just teach her what to think. I
Yeah.
want to teach her how to think. And so if I'm talking on that way of thinking, when let's bring it back. Like I've asked and I've invited you to critique me from your perspective in conversations that we've had. Draw back to, there was the day I remember you came to visit in Oklahoma. And we're sitting in the car, and we were just out on a drive, and then we started talking about faith and theology, and I just remember, I don't know how much of the details you remember of this conversation, but just from my perspective, I remember trying so hard to convince you, and I thought like, oh yeah, this is it. Like I've got my whole playbook here. There's no way she can walk away from this conversation and still feel the same way. Just so like self-righteous and prideful in my thinking. I want to hear from your perspective, like as not only your older brother, but someone who follows Jesus and says that I'm a Christian and I am trying to live by Scripture and by the Bible. How did those kind of conversations come across to you, and what were the things going through your mind when I spoke that way?
I think at the time I was mostly just like, I think I was mostly frustrated because I was like, how do you not understand that no matter what, you can have the best argument, what you think is the best argument for your case, but it's never going to be the best argument for my case. You know, it's like you could come in with your most heartfelt, beautiful speech about, you know, how it makes you feel. And at the end of the day, me and other people who aren't interested in participating in religion will most of the time be like, I love that for you.
Yeah.
But that's it. And I remember at one point I said something about, I feel like we were talking about, I was asking if there's no free will, then what's the point? And how is he a good God if there's no free will and he's predetermined who he picks and chooses? That means nothing to me. And you were saying there is free will because we have the choice to choose. And I was like, but if he knows everything, then he knows I'm going to hell. And if he's truly God, he can change my mind. And so he's okay with me going to hell, but he's not okay with someone else going to hell. So he'll give them a revelation. And you can justify that by saying like, oh, but you know, God works in mysterious ways, but that doesn't work for me.
Sure.
That will never work for me. Mysterious ways, that kind of thing, I can't just hear. And there are so many other people like that. That's just, it doesn't work. It's the same. It's the same as if I started coming up to people and talking about Harry Potter like it was real life. And then when someone got upset with me, I was like, well, in chapter 2, actually, they said muggles don't know about wizards because it is to protect them. So of course you're not going to know it's real. Sure. You just have to believe it's real. Sure. That is how it feels to me. And I'm not minimizing that at all. I think that
but that's the transparency of how you feel. Like that's been your experience. And I think that sometimes in to your point, I can be, and this goes for all followers of Jesus who maybe have people in our lives that genuinely like those conversations started with me out of love, but what overshadowed that love was my pride and wanting to just convince, and like, how could you not believe? And it was like I overshadowed my own, like I was prideful and then covered it with a blanket of love, quote unquote. Like I have air quotes with love, but really it was just trying to convince you of something. And to your point, like it might be convincing for me, but may not be convincing to someone else. And I think that The mistake that I've made so much in my life is that I was more focused on convincing than compelling, and not that even I could compel, but even from my own perspective, it's like I would much rather be compelling than convincing, because convincing is putting myself on a pedestal above somebody else. Compelling is, hey, I love you like crazy. Help me understand more about your life. And then living like this whole purpose of the way of light is, if I'm truly living in the light of what I say that I believe, and that's not just the good things. That's like the purpose of this podcast, is allowing the dirt in my life to come to the surface and for people to know, like, I am broken and I don't have it all together. But I would rather compel than convince. And but even to that point, I know that I can't compel everyone, because if I'm to flip it, so going back to your Harry Potter comparison, like, if you tried to convince me or compel me to believe what you believe or don't believe at this point, you probably wouldn't get very far, because I'm stuck. Like, and it's from a place of, I feel like I've done research and I've lived this life, and through experiences, like, for the same as you and how you got to the place that you are now. And so as a follower of Christ, I have to understand that, for as confident as I am in where I am, trying to convince someone else that they're wrong in what they believe is just as effective as someone trying to convince me to unbelieve what I believe.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Tracking? So,
yeah, 100%.
So in those moments then that I spent trying to convince you, did you feel loved by me?
No, I mean, part of me was like, okay, he's scared. Like, maybe he's scared that I will suffer eternal damnation. And so I was like, all right, if I was scared someone was suffering eternal damnation, I guess I would try and convince them. I understand that. But I think that, I think that there's so much pressure put on, especially young Christians, that, like, your job is to tell everyone, and your job is to convince everyone, and your job is to bring everybody to youth group, and your job is to, like, I remember we used to have, like, competitions. They'd be like, okay, who went out this week and told someone about Jesus? And congrats, you're the weird kid in class who told everyone about Jesus. It's okay to love Jesus and all that stuff. It's totally fine. But I feel like, unless somebody is actively looking for an answer already, or is looking for a solution, and you just absolutely happen to be presenting the right thing, it usually won't work.
Sure.
And, there's absolutely probably been instances where you've told someone about Jesus, and, like, they've decided that was for them, and it changed their life and it helped them. I've seen it happen in people before. But I feel like there's so much emphasis on get the job done that people, like, aren't thinking about their personal relationships with people outside of what God means to them personally.
Right.
Because there's your, what would be your relationship with God, there's your relationship with yourself, and then there's, like, the relationship you have with people around you. But if your relationship you have with people around you is based on them believing and them not believing, and them, you talking about it with them because they believe, and them, you trying to convince them because they don't believe, if there's always an end goal in mind, then it's not a genuine relationship.
Right.
That
is absolutely true.
There's a motive behind it. And relationships, unless your motive is just to, like, have a relationship, then it's not a relationship, it's a transaction.
Yes, that is. And I want to sit on that for a second, and then we'll start to wrap up. But I want to ask about one more experience in your life. Excuse me. So that's true. That's absolutely true. Like, regardless of where you stand on what side of the aisle of faith or not faith, or what denomination or religion you might find yourself in, like, I'm a follower of Jesus. I believe in the words of the Bible as a historical document, and then proofs through history of prophecy and things coming true. But if my goal in having a conversation with someone who believes differently than me has a motive of changing their mind about their own belief, then you're absolutely right. Then I go from compelling out of love to convincing out of legalism. And by legalism, I just mean so caught up in the law, like the rightness of the law of like what's written in the Bible. If I get so caught up in convincing from a place of legalism, then I forget about the more important things like compelling from a place of love. And compelling, to compel is an invitation. It's, I'm going to be the most authentic version of who I believe I was created to be, and hope that in that I can show somebody that there's more to life. And for you, there's areas for you where you want to be like, I know that from conversations we've had in the past, as a tattoo artist, you want to be the difference maker in the tattoo world. Like where there's cliches about tattoo artists or like whatever, like, oh, they might be mean or burly or whatever. Like you're coming from a place of, you just want to be kind to people where they are. Like you want to break the mold and show people that there's a different way to be and to live and to be an encouragement to people where they are. And I believe that that's what you were made to do. And so I want to ask, and the last kind of story I want to hear from you before closing up is your experiences with Youth with a Mission. Like, I know this could be a really long conversation or a really short conversation. Like, I know that you went on this, you decided to go Youth with a Mission right after Dad's funeral, right? Like we had his funeral, memorial service, and then Youth with a Mission. Like what was that? Because I remember you sending me recordings of like The Climb from Will Reagan and singing with ukulele and worship songs. And this is not just to like, but to genuinely understand like your experiences and know, like for some people it's ins and outs. It's I'm understanding and then I'm not, because you were distancing God prior to that. But then like, what was that experience like for you?
It was really good. I'm happy that I did it. I mean, I learned a lot. I think it's really good to expose yourself to other people and cultures and experiences. Like, I think that was, you okay? Okay.
Yeah.
I think that was really, it was defining, for sure. That was my last, what is the saying? It was my last attempt.
Yeah.
I was ready to completely leave it right before, Dad had his stroke. I was just kind of done. And then he had a stroke and I was kind of grasping on for a minute. And then when he died, I was like, all right, this is it. It's now or never. I gotta believe it. I gotta figure this out, because I was I so desperately wanted Dad to be proud of me. And I knew that he would be sad if he knew that I didn't want to, take part in church like he wanted me to. That was me trying really, really hard to stay. And I remember actually right before I went on the trip, I decided to go on the trip because I was talking to this girl and we were talking about going on a date. And it was like a couple weeks before Dad died. And then like it got to the point where Dad really seemed like it was like, okay, this is it. It's like the last little bit of time. And I was like, I got to get over this. Something is like not right with me. I'm just emotionally damaged from this. And that's why I'm feeling this way about church and about, what everything I've ever been taught to believe. And so I went on that mission trip to prove to myself that I could be fixed and I could fall back into it. And I had such a good time on that trip. And I felt like, I built so many great relationships, and I'm so appreciative of the people that I met and the things that I learned. And I felt so good leaving, and I got into the airport in Germany, and immediately went to the Birkenstock store, and there was a girl in there, and she started flirting with me, and I was flirting back with her. And I just, like, in that moment, I was like, oh, I was gone for this whole time to prove to myself that something was wrong because I wasn't in the right headspace. And as soon as I'm back in, and just like nothing has changed for me. And it might seem like really, I don't know, not a big moment, but to me, who I was so desperately trying, because I was like, it's fine. Like, I like guys too, so it's really not a big deal. I can pretend for my whole life, and it's totally fine because I like guys too. I don't even need to talk about it. But eventually I was like, I can't, not talk about it, because it is something that I like, is a part of me, and I'm not going to pretend that it's not real when I experience that, Yeah. And so I loved that trip, but it was kind of the thing that at the end of the day was like, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what I do. That's not where I'm supposed to be,
Yeah.
And not just in terms of sexuality, but in terms of like my questions about, why we're here, and why would God make us if there's a God, and why would his motivation all be put in this little book. It was just like a lot of things that all kind of like wrap themselves up really neatly. And then I pretended for a little bit longer, and then everything kind of just fell apart.
Yeah. Well, thanks for being honest about that.
Yeah.
And I know that there's going to be so, like, this is just scratching the surface of your experiences and the things that you've walked through and the things that have kind of begun to form who you are today, and the things that you've believed in your life and have come to believe. And I am thankful for that level of transparency, because I know that you're not the only person who's experienced those doubts. And I don't know if I ever told you, I sat down with a Mormon or a Jehovah's Witness one day, and I met this Jehovah's Witness on the side of the road next to Lucy's Taco Shop and in Redmond, or La Posada, whatever it is. And I met with him for coffee, and I'm telling you, I went in with like my guns ready. Like, I'm going to convince you to believe the way that I believe about the Bible. And I left that conversation like I like thinking that everything I grew up believing and was taught was a lie. And I went house sat for a week after that. And I was like, honestly, deep depression, and just wrestling with what is everything that I believed. Like, why have I, like, that was the place where I realized everything that I believed up until that point was because I was told that was what I should believe. And that's when my own personal journey, similar to what you came to, of having to discover on your own what you were choosing to pursue and to follow and to trust in. And for me, like, that was the moment of like, I've got to give it all up. Like, I can't do this anymore. Like, I've been living a lie. And really just pressed in and sought truth, not just in the Bible, but in other places. And I compared and contrasted. And so for me, that's how I came to the conclusion that I came to, but no longer was it just because someone else told me to. It was because, similar to you, I had to come to that place and that own understanding for myself. And, and I'm going to say this next thing, not for the sake of saying it to you, but because there are many other listeners, hopefully some that don't actually follow Jesus, because they'll hear that my sister who doesn't follow Jesus is on the podcast, and we can have a good conversation. But primarily for those who have said, I'm a Christ follower. I want to live as an ambassador of Jesus. I want to reflect him in the world, and I want to be the light. But so I'll say this through that lens, that question you came to yourself in the airport, that is a question that I, as a Christian, as a Christ follower, face every single week, where I approach things that I understand and cognitively know because of what I've been taught, but also because of what I've come to understand, are not the way I was created to live. These aren't the decisions that I was created to choose. Like in the moments when I'm tempted to pull up porn on my phone, or to go and seek out like a relationship somewhere else that I know is just not right and not appropriate. Those thoughts cross my mind more often than I would like to admit. Like, it's an embarrassing level, but this is a podcast about being honest. And Kira knows it. And it was the night before we launched our brand new church location here. And the night before that, we went and launched into either our building as a church, from a school to the building. It was the night before that I slipped and looked at porn for the first time in almost a year and a half, 2 years, or multiple, maybe even since high school, and it'd been a long time. And then I had to go and tell my wife that same night, this is where I fell. And she looked at me with so much grace. And I believe this is the grace that Jesus looks at me. And I'm so thankful. She just said, doesn't surprise me. I'm like, what the heck? I'm over here bawling my eyes out because I feel so much shame. And she just meets me the way that Jesus does. And she's like, I mean, you're doing a really good thing tomorrow. And you're launching this church. And you're part of this. It's no wonder you were tempted in that way. And I just felt like the love of God in that moment, like through my wife, and what I believe is just like, so your experiences I can relate with, and that's not from the heart of convincing. It's from the perspective of, I know there'll be others who hear, and I also want to be transparent in that space in my life too, where it's like, oh my goodness, like I'm messed up, I'm broken. I don't know about you. You're probably good. Like, you probably don't have anxiety or get depressed like I do, but
Oh man, no, I'm practically perfect. I'm a 10 out of 10 all the time.
10 to 10.
Yeah.
And so my last question then, and then I'm wrapping up. With all of this in this conversation, in consideration of the conversations that we've had where I've tried to convince you through legalism versus compel through love, how would you encourage followers of Christ, Christians, to live in a way that would be more compelling for people who don't know Jesus?
I think just like stop talking about it so much, just do it. Like, if you want to live like Jesus, live like Jesus. It's no biggie. Like, obviously no one can ever really reach to the par of how he supposedly would have been, but like, if you want to like be a light in somebody's life, just like think of things through that frame of mind. I mean, like, just do things how you think he would do them. And if at any point you're saying like, well, Jesus would do this, but that's not what he would do. Like, if you're questioning it at any moment, that's not what he would do. If you know, any of you actually read and you knew what he was all about, he was like all about absolute kindness, forgiveness, welcoming, loving relationships. Like, that's the only thing that he was about. So I don't know. I think that that's so important for anybody. Like, if you want people to live the way you're living because you're so happy, then like show them why you're so happy just by living your life the way it makes you happy, you know? And then also just loving each other an insane amount, but also loving yourself an insane amount. And when you feel like you've screwed up, or when you feel like you've done something that's like so shameful in the eyes of God, like it's small biscuits in the grand scheme of things. You got to move on, and you got to just be good. And if you mess up and you're not good next time, it's okay. Just move on and be good. Like, I don't know. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. That it makes sense. And whether you know it or not, you're speaking Bible verses. When scripture says, love the Lord your God with all this is the most important command. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. But I'll tell you what, we do a pretty crappy job of loving our neighbor because we're so insecure and hate who we are. Right. And so taking care of yourself. You gotta like yourself. Absolutely. And the other piece of that is just understanding, like, Jesus was very clear. If you want to follow me, take up your cross, deny yourself, and follow me. Like, just flip and do it. Right? Like, just flip and do it. Like, if you're going to follow Jesus, then I have to deny myself, take up my cross, and follow him. And if not, then don't, because what Jesus calls is a high, high calling. And I'm so thankful just for this call and this conversation, Breezy, and just as my sister, and just as someone that I respect, and genuinely, I'm like really, really proud of you and the things that you're doing right now and who you are. And just as a tattoo artist, and like, man, you're engaged. this is exciting. And I'm excited to celebrate those things with you and alongside you. And so thanks for being a part of this conversation in the way of light.
Yeah, thanks for having me on here. I appreciate it. I really enjoy talking to you.
That wraps up this 2-part conversation with my sister, and overcoming differences truly is possible with the right perspective. And as you heard, if you are a follower of Jesus listening today, a person who's not only accepted Christ as your Savior, but also one who practices the Jesus way of living, then I hope you learn from my mistakes. Rather than trying to convince someone with a different perspective than you through legalism, we must turn to compel through love. For those choosing to walk in the way of light, we have a responsibility to live at peace with everyone, not just those who think the most like us. If I needed to have a debate with my sister, I could have had a debate with my sister, and we could have gone at it, but it wouldn't have been fruitful. In Romans 12, 9 and 10, and then verse 18, it says this: don't just pretend to love others. Really love them. Hate what is wrong. Hold tightly to what is good. And love each other with genuine affection. And take delight in honoring each other. Do all that you can to live in peace with everyone. And then in Hebrews 12, verse 14, and I'll close with this: work at living in peace with everyone, and work at living a holy life, for those who are not holy will not see the Lord. It's made clear in Scripture that we are called to live at peace with everyone, not just those who see like us. Don't just pretend to love others, but really love them. Work at living in peace, because sometimes living at peace with others can be work. But as you learn to walk in the way of light, trusting in the power and the name of Jesus to lead you, you can learn to live at peace with everyone.